Welcome back to Echoes on the Satellite. Not any Echoes on the Satellite, it's a Sword and Sorcery on the Satellite episode. Yes, we're back to Sword and Sorcery. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about one of the greats of Sword and Sorcery, Conan. Yes, I got my hands on some Conan, so we're going to talk Conan. I think I mentioned in some previous episodes that I no longer had any Conan novels. I'd had a few when I was younger. They are now lost in the mists of time. And I also mentioned that my first encounter with the barbarian was via comics. And I do have, some of my comics still, but I have a lot of these, well, not a lot. I have some of these Dark Horse collections of Conan, which are really nice. Nice to have them all in one place. I will say I'm not always fond of the recoloring, the way they colored these books. I don't know. I guess, I grew up with coloring in the comics looking a certain way. So the way they color now, not always my thing. But these are great. And I'm planning to introduce a comics segment. So some of these Conans may show up in that. But I finally stopped whining like a cur. And by Crom, I picked up this book, this magnificent beast of a book, which is The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. This is put out by Del Rey paperbacks. This is really nice because it's all just Robert E. Howard, so there's nobody else writing Conan stories, for better or worse, in here. And these stories in this particular volume are put together in order of when Howard wrote them. So not necessarily like when they were published or chronologically for Conan, but when Howard sat down and wrote the stories. So what's kind of different about that is that we start off with Conan as a king already. So not the young, wiry thief Conan, or kind of the middle-aged mercenary Conan, but King Conan. And then it really hops around from there. So you get to see perhaps how Howard's conception of Conan and his world changed over time, and the types of stories he was telling. The back is not nearly as exciting. However, so you get 13 stories in this, and you get a plethora of illustrations, which I will put up. You also get sort of a miscellaneous section where there's notes from Howard on his world, the naming of people and places. There's a bunch of story synopses. There's a first draft of one of his stories, The Phoenix on the Sword, which is the first Conan story he wrote. So you get a lot of material there, and I'll put the table of contents up so you can see the stories that you get here. I believe they published 2 other volumes in this Conan series. So I only have this one, which I got off of thrift books, but it's out there. You can find it from a lot of different sellers. So if you're like me and you're like, I can't find any used paperbacks anywhere, I'm looking and you can't find them, I think this is a good resource for you to go after and get if you're trying to get some of those original Howard stories. And I should mention, as I put some illustrations up, as I'm talking about the book, these illustrations are by Mark Schultz. And there's some really, really nice drawings throughout the book. So that's also, always a plus. And there's some maps in the back of the book, too. And what would a fantasy book be without maps? So for me, that's a big selling point. I'm about halfway through the book right now. Like I said, there's a lot of stories in it. I haven't finished it yet, but enjoying what I've read so far. Now, I'm not going to try to give you any sort of biography for Robert E. Howard. I am not an expert on Robert E. Howard. I will say there's a couple of folks, at least that I follow, who I think are real Robert E. Howard aficionados. So you could go over to Grammaticus books. You could go watch Chris at Liminal Spaces, and those gentlemen uh, have a wealth of knowledge about Robert E. Howard. So if you want to know more about the author and his life, I think those are great channels to follow. And they certainly have videos on Conan and his creator. I will say that I've really enjoyed the stories I've read so far. Um, like I said, I gravitated towards Conan originally in the comics and then moved into the books. I like that Howard's prose is not, how should I put it? It's to me, it's like not overly flowery. He gets to the point. There's a lot of straightforward adventure in these books, but also horror, and sometimes they blend in a really fascinating way. You know, he was a contemporary of H.P. Lovecraft, and I think a lot of what we think of as sort of Lovecraftian stories, you know, you can see those elements in Howard's work as well. There's a lot of, you know, Conan runs into a lot of sort of ancient and otherworldly beings in these stories, and it never seems out of place. I mean, it's just his world, and so you sometimes have sort of the straight up, you know, sword fighting and things like that. But then sometimes it takes this interesting left turn into this kind of dark fantasy. Um, as for Conan himself, I find that, you know, he's kind of an ambiguous character. I guess anti-hero is the best description, and that's probably why his um, popularity really took off in the 70s. You know, I think that um, probably made him very appealing given the times and everything that was happening then. But also, you know, that probably is why he maintains his popularity. He's a character that can be heroic, but not always. He's sort of out for himself, but he will also sometimes go out of his way to help others. You know, he's not easily pinned down, but he's also kind of easy to understand in his philosophy. So a character that, you know, you can sort of root for and enjoy what he's doing. I think one of the best examples of how Howard can write something that seems like a straightforward adventure and then take one of those left turns is the story The Tower of the Elephant. This is a story that starts out in a bar with a young Conan, you know, who's trying to figure out how he's going to cage this tower. So there's this tower in this town, and it's known for having, you know, these fabulous riches. And he's talking, and he finds out that supposedly there's this priceless jewel in this tower that's controlled by this sorcerer. And so the first part of the adventure seems very much like it's just a break-in, right? He and another thief are going to break into this tower. They're going to, you know, sneak past guards and other creatures, and they're going to steal something. And then you make this transition into what turns out to be very otherworldly. In some ways, it almost seems science fictional, but definitely what comes across as almost Lovecraftian fantasy with these creatures. Well, this creature, and I'm gonna read you a little section from this. I got to take a drink of water first, so we'll get into this right now. So I really love Howard's writing here, and you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about with his fantasy. So, you know, Conan is in this tower, and he has encountered this creature that looked like a frail man with a gigantic elephant head on top of it. And the creature asked him to essentially kill him and then take this jewel that he had into the next room to face the sorcerer there. So he says, he closed the ivory door behind him and without hesitation descended the silver steps. It did not occur to him to ignore the instructions given him. He halted at an ebony door, in the center of which was a grinning silver skull, and pushed it open. He looked into a chamber of ebony and jet and saw, on a black and silver couch, a tall, spare form reclining. Yara the priest and sorcerer lay before him, his eyes open and dilated with the fumes of the yellow lotus, far staring as if fixed on gulfs and nighted abysses beyond human ken. Yara, said Conan, like a judge pronouncing doom, awaken. The eyes cleared instantly and became cold and cruel as a vulture's. The tall, silken-clad form lifted erect and towered gauntly above the Cimmerian. Dog, his hiss was like the voice of a cobra. What do you here? Conan laid the jewel on the great ebony table. He who sent this gem bade me say, Yagkasha gives a last gift and a last enchantment. Yara recoiled, his dark face ashy. The jewel was no longer crystal clear. Its murky depths pulsed and throbbed, and curious smoky waves of changing color passed over its smooth surface. As if drawn hypnotically, Yara bent over the table and gripped the gem in his hands, staring into its shadowed depths, as if it were a magnet to draw the shuddering soul from his body. And as Conan looked, he thought that his eyes must be playing him tricks, for when Yara had risen up from his couch, the priest had seemed gigantically tall. Yet now he saw that Yara's head would scarcely come to his shoulder. He blinked, puzzled, and for the first time that night doubted his own senses. Then with a shock, he realized that the priest was shrinking in stature, was growing smaller before his very gaze. With a detached feeling he watched, as a man might watch a play, immersed in a feeling of overpowering unreality. The Cimmerian was no longer sure of his own identity. He only knew that he was looking upon the external evidence of an unseen play of vast outer forces beyond his understanding. Now Yara was no bigger than a child. Now, like an infant, he sprawled on the table, still grasping the jewel. And now the sorcerer suddenly realized his fate, and he sprang up, releasing the gem. But still he dwindled, and Conan saw a tiny, pygmy figure rushing wildly about the ebony tabletop, waving tiny arms and shrieking in a voice that was like the squeak of an insect. Now he had shrunk until the great jewel towered above him like a hill, and Conan saw him cover his eyes with his hands as if to shield them from the glare as he staggered about like a madman. Conan sensed that some unseen magnetic force was pulling Yara to the gem. Thrice he raced wildly about it in a narrowing circle. Thrice he strove to turn and run out across the table. Then with a scream that echoed faintly in the ears of the watcher, the priest threw up his arms and ran straight toward the blazing globe. Bending close, Conan saw Yara clamber up the smooth, curving surface, impossibly like a man climbing a glass mountain. Now the priest stood on the top, still with tossing arms, invoking what grisly names only the gods know. And suddenly he sank into the very heart of the jewel as a man sinks into the sea, and Conan saw the smoky waves close over his head. Now he saw in the crimson heart of the jewel, once more crystal clear, as a man sees a scene far away, tiny with great distance, and into the heart came a green, shining, winged figure with the body of a man and the head of an elephant, no longer blind or crippled. Yara threw up his arms and fled as a madman flees, and on his heels came the avenger. Then, like the bursting of a bubble, the great jewel vanished into a rainbow burst of iridescent gleams, and the ebony tabletop lay bare and deserted, as bare, Conan somehow knew, as the marble couch in the chamber above, where the body of that strange transcosmic being called Yagakosha and Yoga had lain. So you're either going to love that or it's not your thing, but I enjoyed that immensely. So for me, this is a great book. It's a great chance to go back and read Howard's work, become better acquainted with Conan again and have some really great adventures. So I can't recommend it highly enough if you enjoy Conan, if you enjoy sword and sorcery. I mean, these two go together. Again, I love to say chocolate and peanut butter. Conan and sword and sorcery, they're one and the same. And so, yeah, if you're trying to find a good book for Conan, a good sword and sorcery book, I can highly recommend this book. It's already moved moved up to the top of my reading pile, and I'll be finishing it out hopefully soon. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about that. I'd love to hear about your experiences reading Conan. One thing that's really funny is I've talked to some people who are, big Tolkien, Lord of the Rings fans, and I'm one of them. And they don't like Conan. Um, or sometimes the other way around, people who are Conan fans and they don't like high fantasy. And I guess to me, I don't know. I like them both. I mean, I enjoy um, both styles of fantasy. Sometimes I'm in the mood for some sword and sorcery. I want to, have my heroes getting in there and, fighting it out. And other times I want some high fantasy with maybe, a lot of, walking through the mountains and, maybe talking about history, things like that. And so I think there's room for both, but I do know some people who exclusively like one or the other. And I guess maybe that's a question for some of you out there. Do you like one and not the other? And why is that? Why does that appeal to you? One appeals to you and maybe the other doesn't. I'd love to hear about that and your thoughts on Conan. Um, how maybe you came to read Conan and what what your favorite stories might be and all that. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Had some technical issues this week. I don't know if you can tell, but we had some internet and other issues, so I had to piece this one together. But anyway, thanks for hanging in there if you made it this far. And anyway, I hope everybody is doing well. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. And take care, and I'll be back again real soon.